Good afternoon. It's about 1:20 on New Year's Eve, and I know you were waiting, standing, pacing back and forth across your computer, just dying to see slides or presentations about the course that's going to begin next week. I just know you were. At least I know that I was, because I get a little anxious about making sure people have everything they need to get off the ground. First of all, in order to get off the ground, you need to have seen the introductory video, which goes over the syllabus much more carefully than I will do in this particular video. This video is more content based. That's the first thing you need to do. Understand what the assignments are about, and be sure that you're clear on everything that's involved. The only thing that's deficient in the first video that I'm going to address immediately before I forget is that there are 3 discussion activities this week, not 2. The first one is to just post up an introduction of yourself to me and to your colleagues. There's about 6 or 7 people in the class. It's a nice small group, and you can get to know each other pretty quickly, I hope, in order to create some engagement energies. The second assignment, with a small a assignment, discussion question, was your response to the statement, none of us is as smart as all of us, with 1 meaning not at all, you don't agree with the statement at all, to 10 meaning that you do agree with it totally without any exceptions, and all the numbers in between meaning that you see different gradations of the issue and want to address those. No right or wrong answer, but you do need to post that up, as well as explain why you thought what it is you thought, because we'll be actually dealing with that pretty quickly in the beginning of this course. Whether it's true that none of us is as smart as all of us. And the third one is kind of a fun assignment, although it's a pretty complex one, and this particular video will address that more specifically, and that will be the third assignment, which is to post a picture, not of yourself, unless you think you're an example of the culture of a team with which you work, or with whom you lead, or whom you lead. That's fine too. Bottom line is, I'm being deliberately vague. Post a picture with no description of something that you think connects, collects, captures metaphorically, if not actually, what your team culture is about. I post one example about lobsters, and I'm going to leave it at that, because as soon as I give you more examples, you'll gravitate to my examples rather than to examples that you think about. Just post it. There's no other thing to do with that. You can respond to it. Don't even respond to it. We'll do that. We'll save that part for the 3rd week. Okay, so that's some housekeeping to do. I will post one more video, at least one more video, or a PowerPoint before the 4th. I'm not sure when exactly, but it will be about team interpersonal issues and so forth. And certainly, I'm smiling because we'll certainly need to deal with that. And it's important that you read the first 3 chapters of the book. I'm pretty much mirroring the book, not totally mirroring the book, just to get us off the ground. After that, I'm sure I'll begin to deviate. But for this first week, I just want to keep things kind of on the straight and narrow until we begin to branch off. And I'll be judging that based on the quality of the discussions that you will have posted between now and the following week. Enough said. So what I'm going to do is bring up both. One of these PowerPoints is already on Brightspace. The PowerPoint called HPT1. I'm smiling because I have to know my code words. High Performance Team 1, again, for the first week, is not up, at least this moment. I'll have it up, if not today, tomorrow morning. And so I'll share to that. And this is talking heads for the moment, for which I apologize, just to get some basic information down in and among the crevices of your brains, so you can begin to get some baselines for some things. I'm working pretty closely from the book, as I said, in these first couple of chapters. And it isn't as though I would suggest strongly that you just read the book, or you just watch the videos. Or the PowerPoint. That would be a mistake. That would definitely be a mistake in terms of mastery of the information and of mastery of the objectives that we set for the course. But for the moment, I'm going to share the screen, and here it comes. No, it won't come because I did it wrong again. Give me a second. Now we'll do it. Not a whole lot of pretty pictures. It's very straightforward, old-fashioned PowerPoint. And here we go. HPT stands for High Performance Teams, and 23 stands for the year that we're in. And this is the week one, not all of it, actually. I mean, 1B will be, the last part of this will be in the next couple of days. And here are what I see. I'm not even sure I captured them all. Here are what I see as the subset goals, the subset objectives of these 3 chapters. And I may have missed 1 or 2 here and there, but as far as I can tell, and by the way, I think the textbook is very good for what we're trying to do, is to recognize what teams are as a concept, understand, I don't like that verb, I take that verb back, identify common team problems, not necessarily solve them in this first week, but at least identify what they are, and more importantly, identify conditions for success to eliminate or mitigate, lessen, abate, eradicate, a lot of 8 words there, how they affect the effectiveness of the teams that you want to have to be. Obviously, it's opposite. That is to say, effective. You then recognize that the conditions for team success. I use a metaphor sometimes. I'm a little uncomfortable with it because I still haven't reconciled it in my old mind, and I've used this metaphor many times. I'll probably tell you what I'm thinking more than I'm asking you what I'm thinking, but you should think what you think. And that is that I think of a team leader, if there is such a thing. I used to think of a team leader as an orchestra, as a conductor, a musical conductor, Leonard Bernstein, if you've ever heard of him, or other famous conductors who point at the violins and tell the violins to play and tell the horns not to play at the point that they need to play. Over the years, and I still think that that metaphor holds a lot of good strengths to it. In other words, the good leader knows when to play the keys that need to be played in order for the whole with the W to make good music. But I've deviated from that a little bit across the years, and you'll see where my deviation is magnified that much more when we get to the back part of this video today, I think. Where I started to think more of it as a jazz ensemble. You have to understand something. I know nothing about music composition, 0. I know nothing really about how to get a symphony to work, a musical symphony anyway, any more than most people who haven't made it their business to learn about music. I have not. I almost made it my business not to learn about music over the years, and that's another conversation. And so that's why I think to some extent the metaphor may not hold, and you may have a different view on this. But yeah, certainly the conductor makes the good music with a compliant set of musicians. But that word compliant makes me nervous because if I want that group to truly take off, to recreate itself, to take onto itself for mutual empowerment in order to meet tasks, and tasks not even necessarily identified before when the task began, then I'm thinking more of it as a jazz ensemble. Sometimes the flute plays more than the horn. And other times the drums may bang the drums harder than what the piano player may be making, and so forth. And yet in the end, they're co-creating some pretty powerful music. So I go with that for the moment. When we talk about teams, I'm not even sure where this comes into this particular premise here. I guess teams as concepts. I keep that in the back of your little minds as we move forward. So those are the goals for the course, or rather for the first 3 chapters. I'm not going to read all of them at you. They're pretty much taken almost straight from the text, not quite. And then in yellow, you see I divided them into colors. I'm in the yellow color, which is the first chapter, which begins with teams as a concept, recognizing team problems, common team problems, and conditions for success. And then the next yellow takes this first yellow and extrapolates on that. And the first thing I wanted to do is cheat and read to you from Kowalski. Now, Kowalski is one of my people I use a lot in my research. So I think very highly of him. Kozlowski, I beg your pardon, this is on page 2 and goes over to 3, where Kozlowski and Bell is also a great researcher on these things, defines teams as groups of people who exist to perform one or more common goals. I don't think that's that hard to figure out. Interact socially, maybe a little bit higher level of complexity there. Exhibit, this is the key one, I think, task interdependence in order to maintain and manage boundaries, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, and are embedded in an organizational context that sets boundaries that constrain the team and influence exchanges with each other to the broader entity. That's a little above and beyond what we're trying to talk about now, although all of those issues will be examined in the next couple of slides. So Kozlowski, I spelled his name wrong, I realize, speaks about a group of people as task-oriented. I have a problem with that to some extent, but I guess it's for most people's context, task orientation is probably a safe place to go. That have been equipped, we'll talk more about this throughout these next several weeks, with the necessary conditions or variables for success, all too often overlooked, cheapened, disregarded, inequitably dealt with as such. And we'll talk more about that more carefully. And the next bullet speaks very specifically to that. Now, Wohlstetter is not in this text. This Wohlstetter is from my own research. Priscilla Wohlstetter developed what she called, with several other researchers, what she called the high involvement model. I've changed that word to high engagement because I don't like the word involvement. I can be involved watching the Giants on Sunday. Engage is to me is a deeper issue. Engage means you contribute to whether the Giants win, and obviously, if you're sitting on your armchair, you're not. So we're talking about high engagement is when individuals and subset groups of people go to a bigger group and become highly engaged among each other, interdependently, to use Kozlowski's word, towards its task or tasks completion. And now, what you're going to see next, and we're going to return to this several times. I'm just going to gloss through them now, because you need to think of them in terms of the 2 assignments, well, the 3 sets of assignments that you have. One would be, again, the discussion questions. When they apply, these won't always apply in this case, maybe to the second discussion question. But I don't think to the third all that necessarily. So certainly not to the first discussion question where you introduce yourself. But what Wohlstetter did by research was study successful teams in business and in school settings, and came up with this high involvement model, which I've changed to high engagement. And she identified 7 variables. And they are in descending order, from the most strong down to the weakest, just so you know that. And you should get familiar with these in your vocabulary. So Wohlstetter, first of all, says every team needs to know its boundaries. That is to say, a team must know what power it has and what power it does not have. I'm thinking of the Disney Corporation from about a month ago, when there was a lot of dissatisfaction with the then chairman, I think he was the chairman of the board, Bob Chapek, who was irritating not only the customer base big time, but also irritating some high-powered individuals on that board of directors, who got so twisted and turned about what he was doing or not doing that they decided just to go reach out and pull in the person who was the chairman of the board before Chapek, an individual named Bob Iger, who has always had great acclaim for his people skills and his forward creative thinking, futures-based creative thinking. That's not an example of a team working with the boundary. That's the board of directors with all the power in the world who sat down and said, it's going to be Bob Iger. Now we'll let Iger figure out what he's going to do with people who work for him to pull that together. And in some senses, Iger's going to decide, I'm going to do this unilaterally, and other times this is the team that's going to do whatever I think we need to do to set the task and tell them where they can and where they cannot. Sometimes teams get confused by that, and that's when the problems begin. Problems almost always begin with ineffective teams when they don't know what their boundaries are. So it's interesting to me as I'm thinking out loud that maybe the Disney thing, you have to know I'm a Disney idiot savant, that the Disney thing suggests that maybe they need to really understand what Iger's boundaries are or not, or he should need to certainly to do that with his subset bosses, so to speak. But I'm overdoing that. So basically, we're talking about boundaries. Every group must have boundaries. Every team must have boundaries, structure, and an authorization of its power limits. When it doesn't exist, that's when things begin to fall apart. Every team needs to have needs to have information at its disposal about which they can make logical decisions, not willy-nilly wacko crazy decisions, but reasoned decisions. Data as in quantitative, numbers, and as qualitative as well. As an example, coming back to Chapek and Iger, in certain senses, Chapek was making a lot of money in the parks, but like the Disney Plus cable system is bleeding money right now. And people weren't really happy about that. And the only reason they knew that is because they could look at the hard quantitative data. But the other piece was that Chapek was not what we call a people person and was making a lot of unilateral dictatorial decisions, maybe because he thought he had to do it that way. I mean, the captain of the Titanic didn't call a meeting when he decided to put the lifeboats over the side and went and said women and children first. That was a command captain decision. But when in doubt, or research very much demonstrates, and we'll talk more about that along the way, the more nearly a collective group, a collective team, equipped, empowered, taught to do all of what needs to be done, can make the best decisions for the group. So yes, you need data, quantitative and qualitative. And yes, you need to be able to communicate those things down and around and along the line, often overlooked by unilateral decision making. They need to have knowledge. You see, I put that one in bold. They need to know what they're doing. They need to know how. They need to have experience. Well, lacking experience, they need to have information from the first place to compensate for the experience that they don't have. And then you need to look at that second bullet under there, group competency. And some of them you may not even necessarily be able to define today. You need to be able to future. They need to be able to systems think. They need to be able to recognize, participate in collaborative practices. They need to be creative. And then they need to know how to collaboratively inquire with each other, reflectively inquire with each other. Just because you put 7 people in a small room doesn't mean they know how to do any of those things. And they need group skills. That is to say, interpersonal and intrapersonal skills to function well in the group. I'll tell you a secret. I have pretty good interpersonal skills, but not necessarily some good intra. And sometimes I'm not a good group member because I sometimes become a diva. I know that I do, and that's one of the reasons why I teach this course, so that I won't do it as often as I used to understand that there are group intrapersonal skills that must exist. That's why these team building strategies and retreats where everybody holds hands and does kumbaya or climbs a mountain together. I'm not making fun of them, but they're actually good skills for people to know because they learn how to interact with each other and to trust each other. We'll come to that word in a little bit. Every effective group, according to Wolstetter, needs to have SMART goals. Probably have heard the acronym more than once. SMART is an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and targeted goals. Any of those initials are missing, the group suffers for that fact because they're not exactly sure what it is they're supposed to do. I'll surprise you to some extent by saying that it needs to have a subsystem put in place for distributive flexibility. It's a fancy Bernardo word for saying sometimes you break the team up into smaller groups to perform in subset tasks, and you need to be comfortable with giving that task off to Mary and that task off to Joan and that task off to Sam, because they have a certain set of skills and they know some people in that team or sometimes out of the team that will help them get that task done. When they don't do that, they become too rigid, in effect become a multi-headed unilateral dictator. Hear that? I like that term myself. A multi-headed dictatorial unilateral leader. And then we're in trouble. Obviously, they need resources, time. Sometimes they don't have the time, and that causes all sorts of issues, as you all know. And the expertise, which goes back to the knowledge premise. And I left the last one off because I knew that you knew what I was going to say, so I didn't even write it down. And sometimes you need the money, the funding to do what you think you need to do. If you don't have that funding, they say, yeah, go solve this $1 billion deficit, but we're not going to give you any chance to figure out a way to spend in the right places for it. Then that team is doomed from the start because they can't meet their boundaries because they haven't got the resources to do it. And rewards is an interesting premise. In the business world, research shows that rewards are very strong. In fact, sometimes it goes higher than where I have it. If you do a really good job, you get a promotion. Don't do such a great job, you get a demotion or worse. Now, in nonprofits or in schooling systems, rewards are far less, as in terms of money and promotions and recognition, are far less powerful, except for what we what we would call intrinsic leadership. So all these conditions that we're talking about here, and again, we're going to beat these pretty hard throughout the semester. All of these conditions must be necessary, and you should take that and measure as you consider how you answer your discussion questions, or your midterm or your final paper, which we haven't discussed yet and won't until maybe the next meeting. Yeah, there are common team problems. I'm going to use Lencioni. And if you saw the introductory video, you know that I already spoke heavily about Patrick Lencioni, and advise you to get the book. He's written a couple of books since then that I don't think are quite as good, but elaborate on some of these issues. Now, what he did was he did something kind of cute, which was he went at team problems from an opposite point of view to some extent, and based them in a triangle. And you can't see the triangle very well. I apologize for the graphic, but you'll see that I've listed them in the bullets beneath that. A team is dysfunctional, first of all. I'll talk more about this, when they don't trust each other. There's a duh to that. Think about a team that you've been on when you didn't trust the guy sitting next to you, or you knew there was some kind of internal sub-agendas, relationship agendas often, that you throw are a part of what this is all about. I'm thinking of Game of Thrones for some reason. I don't know why. Almost as important, but trust is the bottom line. That's what's the baseline of the triangle. But what also happens, not so much in business, but often in nonprofits or in school team settings, is an avoidance of conflict. And someone will stand up and say, well, the sky is green. And then let's keep moving forward. And if no one says, wait a minute, are you sure about that? I'm not sure that the data tell us that the sky is green. I'm pretty sure the sky almost always is blue. And then you have a conversation about that. I was going to say conflict. It doesn't have to be a conflict where you take off your shoes and throw them at each other or call each other names. But teams that are fearful of inquiring, questioning each other, looking for clarification, to use active, open dialogue skills per Senge. We'll talk about Senge later in the semester. All of those must be existent. Otherwise, they really can't get to the truth of the matter. They can't get to the nub of the root cause of the issues they're trying to solve within the task to which they've been assigned. And so that's a biggie. That's an important point, the avoidance of conflict. And with that, sometimes often, and depending how the team was formed, I'll talk about that down the line, depending on the team was formed, about the lack of commitment sometimes people have in a group. Why are you here, Joe? Well, the boss told me I had to be here. Well, I'm trying to score some points for a promotion I'm looking for. I really don't care what we do with this task. Well, doomed. And you've all been parts of groups where that's been the case. Doomed. Worse yet, when the person walks out of the meeting, goes into the water cooler and says, "I was in this meeting and they were talking about A, B, C, D, and I have little or no interest in it." But be careful, because there's something coming from that group. Pay attention. That's a saboteur, not necessarily a conscious saboteur, but a saboteur, because they aren't committed to the issue. And so people that don't necessarily think that they're accountable for their results. Again, different dimensions ask for different things here. In one case, in business, out of the profit motive, generally speaking, people will pay attention to the bottom line, to use that hateful adjective. And so yes, they will pay attention to it. But in the nonprofits sometimes, or in school systems, you'll see that there's a kind of a gray, vague, well, yeah, we didn't make that goal. Okay, so we didn't mean it, so there's no reason to respond to it, because no one's getting their hands held to the fire, quite frankly, or feels intrinsically responsible to do it right by what the task was to which they were assigned in the first place. Now, use those yardsticks for how you estimate your own teams forevermore from the premises. I would say get that book. So the conditions for success are easy enough. They're the opposite of Lencioni. Trust each other. Argue with each other if you need to. And I'm not going to go through the list. That's the answer to that. So I'm not demeaning it or laughing at what I'm saying, because I think I'm a comedian, so much as to say those are the short answers to the criteria for success. When those conditions are dealt with in addition to, or in tandem with, is a better word to put it, the Wolstead variables we spoke about in the slide previous, then you've got something to look to. You have a recipe for effective team collaboration. So we move from the yellow to the green, and we get a little more fine about some of these issues. There are structure types, and more specifically, and I'm being general on purpose today, and that would be there's flattened hierarchies and traditional ones, and you know which one to which you belong in your teams and in the organization in which you reside. Traditional is what it sounds like, and usually I use the metaphor of a wedding, where if you've been to one of these fancy receptions where there's a sort of a champagne pyramid, and where the glasses are all kind of lined up in a cascading pyramid, and the champagne goes into the top glass, fills up, and spills over into the next two, and down into the next four, and multiplies down to the big fountain in the bottom, big pool on the bottom, where you can dip your goblet in there to get the champagne. That's obviously, how obvious is this? A top-down hierarchical association. The traditional hierarchical associations that we see in many corporations, although that is by research, loosening up, loosening up, I guess is the best word I can use for the moment, where you do have more flattened hierarchical approaches. The purpose of this course is not to examine that as closely as I would love to, but you look at a flattened hierarchical approach reminds me of a spider web. Spider spins her web, and she parks herself up someplace on the outside of the web somewhere. And the minute an insect gets caught in that web, whether it be in the center or anywhere else on the web, the spider scampers down and gobbles up the insect, because the spider is working from the vibration of the network. She feels the network from afar, so to speak. When people are less responsible to a single person, to the captain of the Titanic, but now are more responsible to each other, a different kind of energy emerges, a different kind of collaboration emerges, a different kind of communication emerges. Now, the question would be, and it would be another discussion question, I'm not asking this question, not yet anyway, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 meaning hierarchical and 10 meaning spiderweb, where does your organization sit? Where does the team sit? Is the team also hierarchical, or is even if the organization is a spiderweb, or the opposite? That's an interesting point to consider. So how do I create a group, a team, if I don't necessarily match it to the culture in which it resides? And we're coming over to that in a moment. Now we're talking about the issue of group cohesion, interdependency, respect for each other, collaborative efforts, and culture. In order to get to that vision, I have a problem with the word vision this early in the course, so I'm kind of sitting on that one for the moment. Now, the chapter does a nice job on, especially page 24, if I remember correctly. So I'm not going to belabor it for the moment. You may want to read it more carefully, like you should. But when you talk about, it does a great job. There's 3 diagrams there that I think are really very good, and we'll probably come back to that as I rethink this slide. Something called the ICA, and I'm going to save that one for later. I'll tell you what it is, but I'm not going to belabor it now. Is every team goes through stages. It could be the Boy Scouts you were in when you were a kid, or the church group to which you belong, or the athletic team you were on. Every team goes through an evolution here, and then there's 3 levels to it. ICA, inclusion, control, and affection, or cohesion. The researchers I'm citing here, Bion is one, Bion, call it cohesion, but I'm using the word affection because I think the affection word, no, I take it back. They use the word cohesion. I'm thinking aloud, so I want to make sure I'm correct. They use the word affection. I use the word cohesion. So I'm going to change that later. Where you go through these stages, because every team you've ever been on, and this applies to you, whether you're running it or whether you're part of it, as well as to every colleague with whom you're sitting, goes through an issue where they want to be included or not included. Not everybody wants to be included as strongly as the person next to them, right? And then the other piece of it is, not every team necessarily works to assure themselves that everyone is included equally. Does that exist in a team that you've been part of? By the same token, every group, every individual in a group, as well as the group, either wants to control the group or be controlled by the group. How many times have you seen know-it-alls take over the group and do all the I think, and everybody else sort of sits back and twiddles their thumb, unless that person spout off? That's a control freak who's ruining the cohesion of that team, which goes to the last initial, cohesion, where the team cannot be as effective as it wants to be unless it is cohesive, interdependent. Now, as far as roles are concerned, to continue that premise, and again, we're just glossing over these things today. If the roles are ambiguous, that can sometimes be often is a problem by research, but not always. Sometimes a leader, if they consciously recognize it, may be comfortable enough to let the roles be a little bit ambiguous in the hope that the individuals will grow into the roles that they choose to create for themselves. That's how I operate when I run groups, even though it can cause people some agita, which is, if you're not Italian, is a word for upset uh, and disquiet until they begin to realize what I'm trying to get out of them. And you always know you have a couple of people who want order. Where's the agenda? Are we on item 3, number subset B? And there's certainly a recognized role and a necessary role for those people, as long as they don't act like that's the only reason. As long as they don't overwhelm you with structure and impede and obstruct the ability to exchange and catalyze each other. That's when it becomes dangerous, which is the next word. That's my favorite word, maybe in the English language, catalyst. When a group can turn each other on smartly, it's almost scary by the kind of power they can do when they do that. And there are people who can do that. You should try to find them in the team, unless you don't want that to be anyone to catalyze the rest of the group because of the nature of the task that you've assigned. I already mentioned the word ICA before, and I remind you again about that page 24 thing. You need to take a good look at that. Now, the last thing on this PowerPoint we're going to deal with for the moment, because I'm running out of gas, and I can come back and pick this up next in the next PowerPoint, is culture. You recall that the first thing I spoke about this afternoon, was a third assignment I had given you. Post a picture of the artifact that your group has that you think metaphorically represents the culture of your team. I haven't defined the word culture, by the way, as you may have recognized. I'll let you figure that part out. But what I'm going to do now is switch over to another PowerPoint. I'm not going to do the whole thing. Some of it's not relevant, but some of it is. Most of it is. And I'm going to kind of skip around with a little bit. Because basically what you're going to do is an archaeological, I think I spelled that wrong, archaeological excavation of your organization's culture. And I'm going to skip over the goals because this course is not about that. I mentioned in the discussion that the best, making me nervous and I'm coughing. There's a lot of germs flying around. The best artifact I've ever seen was when a man came in, and I did this exercise in a live classroom over the course of 6 hours. Man came in with a 6-foot-long live lobster on a leash that he had captured while he was skin diving. And we spent 3 hours trying to figure out what he meant by the culture. Now, that's all I'm going to tell you about it now. But it was by far and away the best artifact I've ever seen. Now, you can't physically bring in a lobster or physically bring anything in because we're not physically together. But I need you to get a picture, just a picture, no description of what you think represents the culture of your team or any team you've been part of. And I just wanted to show you what that was about. I'm going to skip over that. Now I'm going to show you this for a moment. I think I'll stop here. You have this video, this PowerPoint in your, come back, in Brightspace. All right. This is a model that was developed by Edgar Schein. Edgar Schein is an expert on organizational culture in all organization internationally. He's not. He's 93 years old, if I'm not mistaken. He's still doing YouTubes and writing books. He's one of my organizational structure idols, if not my number one idol for that matter. And after Mickey Mantle. So I would say that this model has great power. And I'm not going to belabor it so much today because my voice is starting to go. Look at the triangle, not the same triangle as Lencioni, a different kind of triangle, where he identifies three levels of culture. Top of the triangle is artifacts, which is what you're going to post pictures about. Middle of the triangle is the values that conceivably those artifacts represent. What's important? People, profits, social justice, climate change, I don't know, whatever you think these values of the group might be. And again, the bottom line, the basic premise, the part of the iceberg beneath the waves is the deep factors. That is to say, what are the underlying beliefs that the artifacts represent? When you put the three together, they spell mother and they spell culture. And we'll talk more about that as I get to the next video, which will be in a couple of days. With that, and you do have this PowerPoint. There's several more slides than what I've shown you here, quite a few more. It's not necessary for you to watch them all, but you certainly get a good handle on what culture is all about. So what I've done is I've done as a complement to the introductory video I did for you right after Christmas. I'm adding this to you right before New Year's, and these will be parts of what you should be working with for over the next week, all the way through to about the 10th, when I'll be posting more. I'll move into the second week of the modules. Now, on Thursday, before the Thursday, I keep thinking the class is, it really truly isn't. In my head, it's Tuesday, Thursday, but I don't think that way. It's just the way my mind works. Before Thursday, probably Thursday, quite frankly, I'll post a video with the last chapter of this session, and then I'll also add in a description of let me write that down, of the midterm. Because the midterm will be due right next week after the at the end of next week. So I don't want you to be caught at the last hour. So what do I have to need to do? I'll certainly need to give you to that. I'm also probably post for next Saturday. I'm not sure yet. Not sure, but if all's well, I will post a voluntary, he shouted, voluntary, optional voluntary. You don't have to come. Hour of office hours, probably early Saturday morning, where you can ask me any questions that you may have about anything, and I'll be happy to respond to them. You don't have to be there. If anybody does show up, I'll make a decision about whether I should record that video for everyone to see. I will record the video, okay? Unless it's a personal issue, in which case I won't. But if it's the general, anything that's about general issues about the course, or when they get a little deeper into things, I will post that. And so even if you don't come next Saturday in the live office hour, you can watch it when you feel the need to, or not. That's up to you. No one's taking attendance on that count. Okay. So Professor Bernardo thinks he's getting sick. So I'm going to stop right here and not be sick in front of you. I'll come back to you, and I hope you have a great course. And I hope you have a happy New Year.